So it's lesson 5. Recording this just before Thanksgiving. You'll have until week 6 to go through this lesson to customize our bookstore. So today we're going to work on customization, so modifying controller methods for doing things like sorting. We'll customize views, we'll customize models. We're going to implement file upload functionality so we can include images in our bookstore. We're going to add column sorting with JavaScript. And lastly, we will deploy our online bookstore to Azure. So let's get started. I've got my project open and running. And I've populated a few books into the books table. I've used the create new link. I've added some books that I've read recently. So what we want to do is we want to make some changes. This page is functional, but there's a lot of things about it that are not ideal that we would want to polish or improve before this page was ready for production. So we're going to make some changes in the view, some other changes in the controller, and then some final changes in our model. So first thing is we're going to deal with the page title. We've got a page title and a heading of index. Let's change those. So I will go in my Solution Explorer to the books index and change the title here on line 4. So it says books. I'm also going to change it on line 7. So our heading says books. So now we get a search engine friendly title. We're also going to deal with the sort order. So right now the books appear just in order by order of ID. If you see my status bar, ID 1, 2, 3. So as we add books, they'll just get added to the bottom of the list. So what we're going to do instead is we want to sort this first by author name and then by book title. So notice I've got 2 books by Michael Lewis, but the premonition is showing up before the 5th risk. So I want the Michael Lewis books grouped together and then also by title. So this sorting we actually can implement in our controller. So I'll go to the books controller. And all this code was auto-generated. So here is our query. Here's our index method with our query. We were using our database DB context object, the database connection class, and the books DB set that we declared in there last week. So if we just want to go and refresh our memory under data, here's our application DB context. So this file was auto-generated, but we declared a public DB set of type book. And a DB set is an object that we can use for querying and saving instances of the book class. So it executes queries and SQL commands against our database. So we are fetching the list of books. We're also including the parent category so that we can actually display the category name. So this is basically doing a join. And then we are passing the data in our return view statement. So we want to modify this query. We're going to add on an order by clause. And I'm going to use a lambda expression, B, just to represent our books data. We're going to order by the author property of each book. So I'm going to save this, added the order by. There's also an order by descending if you want to go from Z to A. And now we come back and notice we're ordered by author name. So we actually want to enable 2 sorting conditions here. We've got author name, so it's author name first, and then it defaults to the primary key as the secondary sorting. So our premonition, which is book ID 1, is still showing up before the 5th risk, which is book ID 4, even though these are in reverse alphabetical order. So I now want to add a second sorting condition, first by author and then by title. So we can chain sorting methods together. I've got then by excuse me. So I'm going to add on that we're then going to sort by title. So this should reorder my list. The 2 Michael Lewis books will still be at the top, but the 5th risk should be above the premonition because it comes first alphabetically by title. So when we go back here, my page is now resorted. So first by author, and then by title. And also now notice the Salman Rushdie book. Before it was at the bottom, now it's second, even though this is book 3 and that's book 2, because we're sorting by author all the way. Excuse me. Now we also want to add some other sorting. If we go ahead and look at most web pages that show HTML tables, pardon me, typically we get an HTML table. It's pretty normal behavior that we can click on any column heading and our table will resort based on that heading. If we click it again, it then sorts the opposite direction. So we actually did this in our PHP class in our LAMP food site. We used a third-party and open source JavaScript library and we incorporated it in our project to do this kind of column sorting. So we're going to go ahead and actually use that same library in our .NET site. And we're going to add it to the project and link it in globally so any of our HTML tables can use the library. So where do we get the library? The link's here on D2L, same script we used in winter semester. It's this sortable.js. So I'm going to open up this tab. So it takes a regular HTML table. When we add the JavaScript, all the column headings become clickable. So it says step 1, download the library. So I'm just going to right click this orange link that says the JavaScript library, and I will save link as. I'll go to my project and web folder inside of www root. And again, you can see the address, the full path. I'm going to save it into the JavaScript library, JavaScript folder, and it's sortable.js with 2 T's. So again, it's in my solution folder, web project, www root, JS. I've downloaded it. I'm also going to copy this URL so I can reference it in a comment, because our second step is we're going to add a link to this library in our layout file. So in Solution Explorer now, if I go and look, here's our sortable.js. I'm going to open up under Views and Shared. We'll open up our layout. And our JavaScript section's down here at the bottom. So I'll put in a link to where we got the script. And we'll find it in the JS sortable.js script file that we just downloaded. Save that change. So we've done step 2. Step 3 is add the class of sortable to any HTML table class. Notice there is a difference in the naming. The JavaScript file itself is called sortable with 2 T's, but the actual class definition we want to use is called sortable. So if I go back to my books index, we've got this table here on line 12. I'm just going to add the sortable class. And this should now make all of the columns sortable in our HTML. Let's go back. So now I can click on any column heading and do ascending or descending sorting. Not quite sure why it's not working on category. Now, the other thing we should add is there's no visual indicator when this page loads, if I move my mouse over, we don't actually see that these are links. So on this table, right, I get the little cursor plus a tooltip, but I get this cursor. So we're going to change our column headings. We'll make them into links. So I'm actually just going to make this a dead link. It doesn't actually go anywhere, but I just want to format it as a link. So I'm going to hard code in the column heading with an anchor tag. And now it looks like a link. So I'm going to do the same title. I'm not going to bother making the image a link. Users don't need to sort by the images, which we'll get into a bit later. We can sort by price. We'll just put in a space to make that readable. So all the column headings should be links now except for the image column. I'll have to figure out, I'll come back and have to figure out why these aren't working. Not quite sure. Another customization we want to make is to format the price as currency. Now we could do this right here in the index view itself, but instead I want to make the change in the model because then it's going to format our price globally as currency. If we change it in the index view, that's fine. But then when we go to, say, the details, it's not formatted as currency. When we go to the delete confirmation, it's not formatted as currency. So if we format this price property in the model, that formatting should cascade to all of the views where it's displayed in HTML. So I'll jump to the models folder, open up our book model, and we're going to use another data annotation here. We'll set the display format, and I'll use data format string equals, and I'm going to use Microsoft's currency format. So the 0 represents the parameter of the value we're formatting, and the C is the Microsoft currency format. And there's other shorthands for like hour, date, time, things like that. So by applying this in the model, we'll see that wherever the price values are rendered in HTML, they're automatically formatted as currency. Notice I didn't specify a $sign. That's because the currency formatting depends on the regional settings of the web server. So if we're set in Canada, it'll be dollars and cents. If you're in India, it will be formatted as rupees, etc. So now our prices automatically show on all of these views. They're formatted as currency. The only one that isn't is when we're editing, and that's because we need a numeric value here. So when it's injecting the value into an input control, it's ignoring the $sign. So this page, mostly done. We will want to display the images. We'll come back to this. One other customization we want to make on both the create and edit. That has to do with Actually, a couple of them. So here we want to change our label. So we should change this in these labels to add spaces. Notice also our drop-down lists for categories. These are by category ID. So if the lists get long, it's going to be hard to manage. So we want to resort these lists to be alphabetical. So I'm going to add friendly display names for mature content and category ID. We'll say display name equals. So I'm just going to rewrite the property name with a space. Here we can just say the name is equal to category. Users don't need to see the ID term. So we'll add those two display attributes to mature content and category ID. And now our labels look better when we're editing or when we are adding. So now we can look at including some images along with our books. So I've put a zip file up called books on D2L in the lesson 5 folder. These are images that I've got for books I'm putting in. If you are using your own book data, then you can find other images, or you can just use test images. I've found all these images on Goodreads, so I will also make a note on my homepage. So here are the images I'm going to use. And notice I also have this placeholder image. So in the instance that there is no image for the book, we can render this placeholder image. Excuse me. So if you want to use these book records and these images, you can download this from Blackboard. So just before we get into the images, we're now just going to deal with these sorting of the categories. Pretty simple to do. So in my books controller, we've got two create methods. We have a get, and we've got a post. So when we click on add a book and it loads our form, it runs the create method. This just returns the view. This line of code on line 51, this is what's populating our category list. So it uses our database connection, it uses our categories DB set, and it's using the category ID as the data field, or the value field, and it uses name as the text field. So we can add on to this. We can just add on an order by into our query. So instead of ordering by category ID, we want the categories to be displayed alphabetically by name. So we'll just chain on, just like we did on the book's index, we'll chain on an order by clause. So when we're fetching the list of categories, we want them sorted alphabetically by the name. If I go back to my create form, notice now our dropdown is loading in alphabetical order, which is what we want. So now we need to modify the form so our image text box will become a file upload box. So we're going to make a few changes on the form. We've got this kind of lousy title, just says create and then a subheading of book. So we'll fix that. And then we'll enable our file uploads. So I will go to our views, books, and create. I'll say add a book as the title. We're not actually creating something new. We are simply adding an existing book to our bookstore. So change the title on lines 4 and 7 to say add a book. And now I need to modify my HTML form tag, which is now on line 12. You might remember from our PHP class when we learned how to upload files in PHP. In order to accept file uploads, our form tag will need the attribute of encoding type equals multipart /form-data. This attribute will allow us to encode any file that gets uploaded into binary so we can copy or transfer it from the client device up to the web server. We won't get an error without this attribute, but file uploads will just get ignored. So we're going to need this on both our create and edit forms. And then down here on line 26, we've got this input for our image property. Right now, it's just a single line text input. So we're going to change that to be a file input type. So I'm going to add this attribute, type equals file. And when we go back and reload the page, we'll see that text box for image has been changed to a file dialog box. So now we get a browse button. We can go and we can pick some file. So we've set up the form part of this. This was the easy part. We've now got to do a few things. On the back end, we need to set up some location of where these images are going to go. So we have this www root folder with some public assets, but it doesn't actually create an images folder. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to right click www root. I'm going to add a new folder, which I will call IMG. And then inside of here, I'm going to right click and again add another subfolder underneath IMG that I will call books. So we've actually got two images folders here. The main images folder for things like, our site logo, any other information in general. The books folder will hold the images for the products, for the books that we put in the bookstore. So this is going to be our target when we upload a file. This is where it's going to get saved to. And now we can go back to our books controller. So here's our post method. This is where the form inputs are bound. So each input is connected to the corresponding property. In a book object, we check if the data is valid, and if it is, we add the new object and then save to the database. So in here, if our data is good, but before we save to the database, we also want to process the file upload. We want to process the file upload. As we're doing that, we'll need to do two things along with that process. Number one, we'll want to name the file that's uploaded uniquely, so it doesn't overwrite a file with the same name. If we upload book.jpg, we don't want to overwrite another file we already have on our server called book.jpg. So we're going to use a convention to generate a unique name. That's one. The second thing is after we generate that unique name, we're going to need to assign that unique name that we're going to create programmatically to the image property. So that name gets saved to the database. Now, this process is going to be pretty much the same when we're adding a new book or editing an existing book. So rather than writing all the code to do the file upload and generate a unique name, within create, I'm going to make a separate function for this, a reusable function that we can call from both the create post method as well as the edit post method down below, which does similar things, but instead of calling add, it calls update. So maybe just underneath our create post method, I'll create a private static method that returns a string called upload photo. And it'll take a parameter of type iForm file. Maybe I'll call it upload image. Doesn't really matter. And it says it can't reference iForm file. If we want to use this, we need to make a reference to Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.http, which I will do. So it says this is an interface that represents a file sent with the HTTP request. So let's set up our method to process this. First thing is get temp location of uploaded file. So much like with PHP in .NET, when we upload, it goes to a place in server memory. Step one is figure out where is the temporary file. So we call path dot get file name. Get temp file name. Visual Studio says it doesn't recognize the path object. So we want to make a reference to system.io so we can do input, output, basically file system read or writes. So a reference system.io and our error goes away. We're going to use a globally unique identifier, also known as a GUID class, to create unique name. So we'll create a variable called file name. We'll use a new GUID and we'll as a prefix with a dash. So we're going to keep the existing name, but we're going to generate a new name. So something like this. So book.jpg will become something like so this way, Microsoft guarantees that this new GUID method will generate a new globally unique identifier. Then we want to set up the path, use our path, and we want this to be dynamic. In order to write the file path, we can't use a relative path. It has to be an absolute path, meaning it has to start with the root drive letter. The challenge there is that's going to be different. I don't want to hard code the path because when I run it locally, that path is going to be very different than when I upload my application to Azure, which will have a different file structure. So that path is going to be, needs to be dynamic. So we can move the application from server to server without having to rewrite the path. If we use system.io.directory, we can get the current directory, and then we're going to append on our www root, img, and I'm using double slashes to escape these characters, and then our brand new file name. So this is ultimately where the file will get saved. Then we're going to execute the file transfer using a stream object. We're going to create a new file stream in our upload path, and our file mode will be create. And in that stream, we just call image.copy_to our stream. So here's the process. Get the temp file, get the file from cache, generate a unique name that also includes the original file name, figure out the current directory on the operating system, and then point to our books directory with our new file name. Use a file stream object to copy the new image in create mode. And lastly, return new file name. But then we'll just return our file name. So this is our upload method. we'll be able to call this when we're both creating or editing, doesn't matter. So I'm going to go back up to my create post. If our model is valid, upload image, if there is one. Now I need to modify something here as well. Our image property right now, by default, the scaffold encoding automatically just binds this value to the image field. We need to interrupt that. We need to take it out because we are going to generate a new name for that image. I'm going to take image out here, and I'm going to list the image as a separate parameter to the method. So it's no longer just a bound text field. Instead, it represents the file sent with the HTTP request. Now, it's not required, so we could still add a book without uploading an image. In this case, the iForm file is null. So we'll say if the image is not equal null, then we can say our file name is equal to upload image, where we pass in that uploaded file. And then we'll set the image of our book equal to the file name. So we're passing that uploaded file to our function. Our function goes through and names it, saves it, returns the new file, the new name, the new unique name, which we're going to assign to our book object before we call add and save. So we're manually populating the image property as a string. All of the other properties, they get bound automatically when the create method is called. So let's try this out. I'm going to try and add a book. I just listing some books I've read recently. Mix of fiction and nonfiction. So I'm going to browse to the image I downloaded. My category is fiction. So now we can see, this is encouraging, this is what our GUID looks like, and it's appended on to the beginning of our book name. Now, obviously, we'll still need to customize this. We'll still need to fix this up. And if I go into my Solution Explorer under Books, I can now see I can see the images here. So now, if I go back here, I want to, this is not very useful, displaying. In fact, I can probably just take out the image heading altogether. And instead of displaying the text, the file name, I want to check if there is an image here. I want to display it with an img tag. So go back to my index. I'm actually just going to make this a blank heading. And now inside of the image, I'm going to write a little if statement instead of just printing out the string. Say if add item.image does not equal null. Then I'm going to display it. And it's going to be in the images folder, in the book subfolder. It's going to be our add item.image. I can put in an alternative book cover. So if we do have an image for any of the books, I want that image to, whoops, that should be item image. I don't know what happened. Every once in a while, My server just dies. Okay, so now my image shows up here. Now it's way too big. So I think I'll shrink this down. So let's see, what can I do? I'm going to add a class here. So class equals thumb. I'm going to create a thumb class in my CSS file. So in Solution Explorer and CSS, and go to my site.css. Maybe I'll try, let's see. I'll try 100 pixels. I'll have to experiment a little bit. That's probably better. Okay. Now, I've also got this, created this little placeholder image. I'm going to copy that one and also put it in. I'll just paste it into the books folder. So there's my placeholder. So now I'll modify the logic a little further with an else statement to say, if the image is null, show the placeholder instead. So when we have a book cover, we'll display it. And when we don't, we'll display the placeholder instead. Okay, our placeholder is maybe a little small. There. Just needed. Okay. So we're almost done with our image uploads. The other thing we should be able to do, though, is I should be able to go ahead and edit a book and have the same changes, right? I want my drop-down sorted A to Z. We want the current image showing up, and I should be able to change it. So let's go to our edit view. So under book views, books, and edit, I'll change the title to say edit book. I'll get rid of my H4. In the form tag on line 12, we're going to add the same encoding type attribute we added in the create view. We've got to set it to multi-part form data so that we can transfer files. And again, on line 27, we've got our input for image. So we're going to set that to type equals file. The other thing I'm going to do in here, inside of this div where the image, is we're going to check if there is a current image, let's display it. So we'll say if model.image not equal null, right? We're going to show it. And we can maybe show it at full scale. We'll see if we need to shrink it down. So now when I go to edit, it shows the current image, but I could browse to a different one. Cool. We also have to deal with the dropdown. That's in the controller. So in the edit get method that loads this form, we've got the query here. So go back to my books controller, scroll down to our edit get method. And on line 116, here's the query again. Get the list of categories, ID is the value, name are the text property, name is the text, and pre-select the existing book. So again, like we did in the create, we're going to order by category name instead of category ID. So we're going to append this order by clause on here into our select list. And if we go and look at the edit view, our list should now be sorted alphabetically, which it is. But the correct category is still picked. So our last step here is now inside of our edit post. We're going to make the same changes we made to the create post. So I'm going to move the image property. I'm going to make it its own parameter, again, of type iForm file. So image is no longer in the list of automatically bound fields. It's now represented by the file being sent with the HTTP request. And in here, if our model is valid in this try catch, before we call update, we're actually going to do the exact same code. I could even copy and paste it, but I'll just run it again. So if image does not equal null, we'll create a variable called file name. We'll call our upload method and pass in the file that got uploaded. And again, we'll take our book object and then assign this unique file name we generated with the GUID. We're going to assign that to the image property before we call update and save. So this code is identical now in the two post methods. When we're creating a book or editing a book, same thing's going to happen. If we have a file that got uploaded, we're going to process it with our upload method and update the book with the unique name. So now I should be able to edit some of these existing books. I can go here. There's no image showing up for the fifth risk. Here. I can add the image for the premonition. And just to make sure it's working, I'll add one more book. Got the image for Think Again. Okay, so I can add or edit. I'll leave this one here with our placeholder just so we can see our logic. This is starting to come together. Okay, so we've made some changes in the controllers, some in the models, some in the views, but our page is a lot more functional now. So what we get from the scaffolding isn't always exactly how we want to display or work with our data. We might want to change these to use button classes instead of links. You can certainly do that as well if you want. So we're going to do two more things with our site today, but we want to do some design customization. We want to personalize this, and then we're going to look at deploying this site to Microsoft Azure. So we will do that in the next video.